it's important to reflect lots of different stakeholders and perspectives in this discussion. Let's get into it with our next panel. So please welcome our speakers. They are as follows. Senior Vice President, Marketing at Austin FC, James Ruth. Digital Media and the Studios Director at AC Milan, Lamberto Siega. Chief Commercial Officer at CONCACAF, Heidi Pellerano. And Digital Media and the Studios Director at IOCONIC, Elfried, Samba. And always a pleasure to invite this man back to moderate. He's a staple of WFS events, both in person and virtual. Global President at Nolan Partners, Chad Biagini. Guys, please take your seats. Thanks, you very much indeed. Chaz, I'm very much looking forward to this one. Over to you.
Thank you, David. Guys, we have a big responsibility right now. We are 2 hours after lunch, the time of day where the body's digesting, it's relaxing, and most people had their last shot of espresso a few hours ago. So we're going to bring the energy. Good to spend time with all of you, Elfried, Heidi, Lamberto, and James. Football organizations, they recognize the importance of fan engagement, really now more than ever in a world that's competing for their attention, from video games to other sports to advertising. And you're all here because your organizations stand out in this area of fan engagement. So here's my question. Why? Why do you place such emphasis on building community and fan engagement over many other organizations out there? I'm going to do this one in order. So James, I'm going to you first.
Yeah, I think it goes to, you know, we're a new club. We're now in our second year. So the questions that we asked early on were quite different than I think a lot of other clubs are going through. But for us in Austin, you know, the biggest opportunity that we had was not to be Austin's football club, but to be Austin's kind of community connector. There was no other institution in the city that really represented Austin in a way that we thought we could uniquely. And so from the get-go, we never were asking how do we be Austin's best football club. It's how do we be Austin's best representation of the city. And I think for us, that immediately turned us into a community-centric brand rather than solely a football-centric brand. And it's something that we've started tracking a year out before we actually even kicked a ball for the first time. We actually go out and ask Austinites every 6 months, who is the cultural flag bearer for this city, right? You can name it. Is it University of Texas? Is it South by Southwest? Is it ACL? Is it Willie Nelson? And we've seen Austin FC continually tick up that ranking to the point where we're now second in the city after only playing for 12 months, really. And I think it speaks to the fact that from the get-go, we've been trying to position ourselves as that entity that can best represent Austin, rather than just focusing on the football alone.
Love that. Congratulations, too. Lamberto.
Well, I may have, I would say, less romantic view about that, maybe because the club is actually owned by a fund, so there is a lot of question why we should invest in digital, why we should invest in studios, why we should, open a new account. And the reason is why, because at the end of the day, it drives revenues, Big community, very well engaged, drives conversion for merchandising, drives conversion for ticketing, drives conversion for sponsor that eventually they want to buy eyeballs. So it's super important to be focused on digital communities and physical communities as well, when you organize activities on the territories for the fan clubs around the world. So it's really at the center of the value proposition of the club. And of course, eventually you are, similar as all the clubs, is made by the fans. So there is also the romantic part of it, to be close to them and satisfy them with great content and engagement.
Heidi.
First of all, good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you. It's very interesting because at CONCACAF, when our new leadership took over in 2016, they made sure that one of our biggest priorities was to put football first. So when I joined CONCACAF in 2019, my team immediately looked at me and said, okay, we're the commercial team. How do we put football first? And I said, it's very simple. We put the fan first, right? The fans are an important part of the equation, right? That's how you put football first. You give them the best product and the best experience. So one of the things that we wanted to do is, as a commercial team, is reframe our mindset, right? When a lot of times people think of commercial, you got to go sell, sell, sell. I'm sorry, my job is not to sell. My job is to create the audiences and the systems that allow partners to want to engage with us. And I think that was an important piece of changing the mindset because it also allowed us to change where we invested. I found it very interesting when I went to our first event at Gold Cup. I joined very close to it, so I was told, do not touch it, right? Like the team has been working on this for a year. So I found very interesting that I went there and all the activations and things like that were brought by our sponsors. And I was like, well, where's the CONCACAF activation? Where's our engagement? We're a brand in this too. So that was an important aspect of how we started to think about, because we as a confederation have the unique balance of having to say, I need that Austin FC fan to also want to engage with CONCACAF for Champions League. I need the Mexican Federation fan to also want to engage with CONCACAF for Gold Cup and Nations League. So that was the biggest thing that we wanted to do, is make sure that there was all these communities ladder up to our community as well.
Thank you. Elfried?
From my side, I think that it's really, really important for a business, football team, or any association to always aim to be as close to the current state of culture as possible. It's important to almost like take upon an evolve or die mindset, because the audience will go and it's now our responsibility to follow, to be able to survive in the long run. Effectively, it's the current state of culture, right? Our audience are there, the consumer is there, but there's a way that you're able to use it in a way to be able to generate revenue and for it to make sense, because I still think till this day, there's a lot of CMOs that are trying to convince their CEOs or COOs about the ROI of social, right? But the reason is because people see social media and community building as an all conversation versus anything else that we're doing. But really it's an and conversation, how it complements the wider strategy that you're putting across. Now, there's three main ways that I've seen that businesses, football clubs can benefit from the value propositions that comes from social media and being community-led. The first one, of course, being all about the reach that you get at very low scale. If you compare it to what you had to do 20 years ago to get the same amount of reach, doing it organically, that's a no-brainer. The second one is all about advocacy. And we all know in the football world, fandom makes a lot of money, right? And it's great and it's profitable. But actually, can you get people to love you, not just for how you play football, but what you represent? That's two new ways for you to be able to generate your fan base. Like, I know that for the most part, there's a couple of big clubs that almost already get the land grab of fans from a footballing perspective, but this is the time for the underdogs to be able to shine through. An example with what Ryan Reynolds is doing with his new football club, right? In terms of like the grand scheme of things, not the best football team in the world, but because of the cultural impact, they're galvanizing new and young audiences. And finally, I think people always look at social and new technology as a way to just sell. But then I think the great thing about social media, it's all about listening. Because ultimately, it'll give you the GPS and navigate you towards what the right decision is for your business. By putting content out there and seeing what does the fan think, you can either determine whether to continue to do something or to do something completely different, right? And that's, I think, is the missing ingredient that I think a lot of people are missing out on.
Yeah, to your point, 10 years ago, if you asked a lot of chief marketing or revenue officers, they would have said, we're selling winning or we're selling hope.
Yeah.
But we've reset that in recent years, that thinking, right? Community, belonging, a sense of national pride, whatever it might be for your organizations. But on that note, resources are finite.
Yeah.
There's only so much money. There's only so much time. What is that balance between physical, experiential engagement versus digital and social engagement?
Going back to what I said, I feel like we always see it as an all conversation, right? It's almost digital versus physical. But actually, for those that are in the industry, we're realizing that actually the most experiential and viral moments that happen offline are the ones that tend to make the most noise online. There's a lot of people that are putting up pictures of billboards and experiential activities that brands are doing online and getting great brand traction. So actually, if your times or your dollars or your time is really tight, do more things offline and capture it, and then put it online, right? So if you can be innovative offline, you'll be innovative online is what I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think, for us, one of the things that's important, and I think this is across the board and others can share, we know as CONCACAF, we have 41 members. We can't have events in all 41 of our countries. So the digital footprint is extremely important because that's how we maintain unity within all of our fan bases. The infrastructure for our major competitions like the Gold Cup, they're usually held in the United States. Well, I need to make sure that my fans in Mexico and Costa Rica and Honduras are also part of the experience. And that's what digital allows us to do, right? Make sure that even if you can't be live, present at the match, you're still enjoying the experience, maybe a little bit of a different perspective, but you're still connected to the rest of the team and the fans that are able to attend. So I agree with you. I think you have to find a balance. And one of the things that we also see digital as a critical component, and I think James will probably agree to this where he is in his trajectory, it's the storytelling to get you to care, because I'm still building the CONCACAF brand post 2015, right? I need to make sure that constantly people see this is a new organization with new priorities that is doing great things to develop football, which is our mission. So this is our platform to make sure that everybody understands that across all of our members.
Yeah. I'm coming to you, Lamberto. You won the cup this year, so you had a chance to amplify stories. Give examples of how you guys used digital engagement this past year.
Sorry, can you repeat the question? Because
Oh, sorry. I said
no, it's just the noise.
Just the balance of digital engagement versus physical
Oh,
engagement.
yeah, of course. Well, let's say that the magic, particularly on the last season where we were, we won the league after 11 years, starting the stadium. So it's not only about, the pitch, the performance of the team. It's about, the experience of the people in terms of hospitality, service for family, light show, special merchandising and stuff like that. But of course, in the stadium, you just reach a certain part of your fans. And the club is huge from this point of view because we have more than 500 million of fans across the world. So what is the way to reach them? It's digital here, it comes in. Because you can offer through social networks, through your platform, you can offer content before the match, during the match, after the match, but you can also leave the week, with digital content. If you are good enough to adapt your content to the different communities and platform you can use. One example that we are really proud of what we do on Twitch. So we are probably the only teams that on Twitch allow fans to do during the live press conference to the coach before each match, direct question to the coach, which has been a big step for us, because the sport department is always very defensive in terms, which journalists can participate, the number of questions, the timing. So having someone that from US or Asia can write his question, be selected, be the one, that directly make the question is something, it's really cool. So digital allow really to have a completely different experience for all the fans.
Yeah, love that.
Yeah, I think from the Austin FC side, kind of leaning on what Heidi was talking about, I mean, our experiences are bread and butter. I mean, when people walk into that stadium, I think a lot of times, it's unlike anything they've seen before. Supporter section's going, they've got songs, they've got instruments, it's a full 90 onslaught. And that's our asset for digital, right? That's what we then repackage and make everybody in the US think that is the stadium that I have to go to. And so for us, it's not an either or kind of a mutual exclusive thing. It's more about, okay, we've got the pot of gold here in terms of what's going on with these fans in this stadium. How do we do the right creative, the right storytelling to make sure that it's something that's super inviting for people? And also, like, a big thing that we conscientiously think about is, okay, how do we make sure that the fan can see themselves there from a digital perspective, right? It's not just about the highlights. We all know that now. It's about this extension of before kick, after kick, and what's happening in the stands. And we've seen so much success in terms of just turning the mirror around with our fan base. When they start to see themselves in the social, engagement goes up, interaction goes up, amplification goes up, and it really kind of creates this sort of echo chamber of getting people just psyched about the match experience and feeling like they need to be there, right?
The community is a common theme among all of your brands. How do you measure this community engagement, and where have you discovered ways to listen better to what your fans want?
Well, there's there's a lot of metrics that people use, and a lot of them are vanity metrics. So for example, you can look at how many total followers you generated. You can also look at how many sales you generated, but is that a real true measure of fandom and community? Maybe not. One or three different metrics that I tend to really focus on is the total amount of engaged followers. What's your total followers versus those that are actually engaging? That's your true fandom count. But equally, you can start to measure things like community EMV, right? Based on, all right, cool, based on your traction as a brand or an entity, how much is based on what you're doing versus how your fans are interacting and talking about you? In my past role, we started to realize that actually more people heard about the brand through people reposting and sharing and engaging with the brand than from us ourselves. And that's a really cool way to be able to identify whether you have true advocate salespeople within your community. And finally as well, it's super important to also look at your sentiment, because you can have all the high engaged followers, you can have people talking about you, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's a good thing, right? Are they talking positively about you? Are they, when you are challenged, and I'm sure that everybody will put their hands up that their brands at some point will be challenged, do people come in your defense? That's when you know when you've got people that really have your back. And that's what I think that everybody should aim to build. And the simplest way to check the metrics is you read the comments.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think with measurement, it's a very interesting balance, right? Because not to say it's the it word, it's an important research and insights, but to me, I focus more on the insights part of it. You know, I tell my team all the time when they come in very proud and they show me, we grew 10%. And I sometimes use more flowery language, but I won't use it here, of like 10% of what, right? Because if we were bad, that's still bad, right? So I always try to make sure that every time we look at numbers is within context, right? And we have a great benefit that, because they get nervous, right? Immediately it's like, oh my God, she wants to know how we compare to the NBA or the NFL or the Real Madrids. No, I'm trying to look at, I have 41 members. So I can look at US soccer stats, I can look at the Liga MX, I can look at MLS, these are all my constituents. So I need that universe to be in my universe as well. So that's a lot of times what we focus on. The second part is very similar to what was shared in terms of thinking about what I create, but what are they creating? Who are those audiences? Like we spent a lot of time on YouTube and Twitch and all of that to see who's creating content on our behalf. Because that to me really then tells me I do have an engaged audience versus the people that are just interacting with my content, right? And I always tell people that's the mark that you're doing something well, when they take ownership. And that's what we want. We want to be the ones that kind of light the fire, but let them, like the torch relay, they take it and they run with it.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think the other thing about, you know, the fan base or people running with that content is you got to go all in, right? We had a couple fan groups that very quickly started their own content channels and created their own little media empires around Austin FC. And there was a feeling of, man, they're saying anything they want to, and they're going all in, and you know, it's early on, and that's a good thing. That's part of the dialogue. If you're asking people to be so engaged, to care so much, you've got to be willing to kind of roll with the punches from that perspective. But going back to kind of how to track and all of that sort of stuff, I totally agree. It's about the engagement, and then after that, how are you defining sentiment? And sentiment can be a very tricky thing to try and capture and chase, right? So that's, going back to my first point, we were so focused on consistent measurement on a biannual basis of what do people think of us and how are they explaining us? And let's do it before we even touch the pitch so we understand what our actual movement is versus trying to kind of play cup and ball with insights and what's actually going on in the marketplace.
I agree with the panel, you know, it's mainly about engagement, but also the Heidi's point about, you know, to contextualize the result, the performance you make, because if I look at the track of the Milan in the last 4 years, we have been growing in engagement in the size of follower, but the gap versus, you know, other big clubs are getting bigger and bigger because there is like a natural growth of the social network that, you know, if, I don't know, Real Madrid has 100 million more followers than us 4 years ago. Now there are 150 million. So someone can ask, so are you doing well or are you doing bad in your performance? Then so you go deeper in the analysis. For example, you see the engagement per rate, per post, and you see the performance is different. So what you do really matters for your communities. Also, another interesting KPI that we look a lot, because we need in this year we had to give a lot of space to sponsor to generate revenues growth. So we are one of the with the highest rate of sponsored content across the social, and we look at the performance of this content in terms of engagement, and it was as good as the editorial content, which means that the focus on good quality content of the storytellings was good enough, and it showed a good storytelling for both for us and the sponsors.
I actually just wanted to add to that point, because we are talking a lot about community and social media and marketing, but at the end of the day, the product has to be able to match with that as well. I'm just going to admit to something. So my favorite football club is Arsenal, right? So that as you will. And when it comes to fan engagement, we're just talking about people creating channels. We have Arsenal Fan TV. There's an Arsenal war happening. Some are pro this, some are against that. But what's happened is, because there's such an engaged audience amongst themselves, if you ever put an Arsenal player on a vote for Player of the Week, they'll win all the time because the fans are so engaged. But now, when the product gets better, which is the style of football and the results, you can't get an Arsenal ticket anymore, right? It's impossible to get a game. So if you get your fans galvanized and engaged, that's the first bit. But then once you fix the product and you win a championship or start playing better football and start to really get a team that believes in the vision that you're putting out there, that's the perfect combination to long-term sustainability and sales.
On this note, in order for communities to function optimally, it's important that there's a sense of connectedness and belonging and smallness. But a lot of your organizations, hundreds of thousands, hundreds of millions of fans. And the biggest organizations think about this all the time, right? How do we make our church, our school, our business feel small enough that people have a sense of ownership there? So how does a massive football organization find ways to give the fan this feeling of smallness, belonging, community? Any of you?
I think it's all about personalization, right? And it starts by understanding your fans. I think James will laugh a little bit about this because he'll know what I'm talking about. But I remember when I joined CONCACAF, and I said, can I see my fan segmentation study? And I got a study of the US soccer fan, and I got a study of the Mexican fan. And I was like, what do I do with this? Because this is about how they interact with Mexico and US, not how they interact with CONCACAF. So that was the first thing we did, immediately moved budget around. I said, we got to do our own fan study. We have to understand our fans, how many different types of fans do we have, so that then we can create more content specific to that. And one of the things that we uncovered, especially on the national team side, and I've said this before, trust me, people look at me funny when I say this, but the CONCACAF has a very unique situation, which is the diaspora, right? We have large diasporas of our members across the world, right? If you go to England, I'm sure you can talk about the Caribbean diaspora. By the way, that happens in the Netherlands as well. Mexican in Spain met a lot of Hondurans already. So that makes us understand that now we have a lot of people that are displaced. And this is their connection to what they left behind. So I always say, I feel like when I go to a CONCACAF match at a stadium, that's our embassy. It's an embassy. Because the Salvador feels this is my territory. I am at home for these 2 hours. So that allows us to really start thinking about, as we understand our fans, their connection to the sport, their situation, now we can start creating more customized content that can make that experience feel much smaller. So I think it's about, you have to start with understanding, not make assumptions, and then create that personalization.
Heidi, stay there. So you shared a story with me recently about a fan in Nashville who commuted all the way down to Miami for a match. So that's a perfect example. Share that with everyone.
Yeah, so it was fascinating. Literally, they announced a friendly match between Honduras and Argentina Honduras didn't even qualify for the World Cup. It's a friendly match, really not even a tune-up match, right? It's a friendly match. And the gentleman posts on Twitter the Google Maps of how long it's going to take him to drive from his home to Miami, and it's 13 and a half hours. And the post is, 13 and a half hours, nothing compared to my love for country. To me, that's CONCACAF. And we have so many of those examples, not to speak bad about anybody, but we had a match, New York City FC against a team from Guatemala, and a paper in New York wrote, wait, I thought this was a New York City FC home match. Well, somehow 5,000 Guatemalans from Michigan decided to drive to New York, right? That to me is the things that we need to understand. And we actually do a lot of research to understand how far our fans are willing to drive, because that helps us also understand where we can do events to draw the most people.
James, you guys have done a lot of this too with some of the collaborations with different artists, musicians. Share that.
Yeah, I think we've made a focus of trying to be extra referential whenever we can be. You know, I think we're really skeptical of going too broad and sometimes missing the point and getting into this sort of atmosphere where you get into brand marketing speak and nothing really hits with the fans. I think for everything that we do from a marketing perspective, we ask the question, how does it get us closer to being a flag bearer for Austin? That's the goal, right? And we found that trying to think about how we be referential to sub-communities that everybody in Austin cosigns is important to Austin identity has been a fantastic way for us to create connectivity with those sub-communities while also creating a situation where everybody in Austin says, oh, they get it, right? They get it. The first thing we ever did as a marketing organization, and it was a year before we even started playing soccer, was during COVID. We created a collab t-shirt with a local band called the Black Pumas, who at the time and continue to be kind of at the center of this sort of cultural zeitgeist for the city. And we teamed up with them and we created a t-shirt, and all proceeds went back to local music venues and record shops. 2 lifelines to Austin culture. Nothing to do with football, nothing. And we also broke a major rule. We mashed up our crest with the Black Pumas logo. Not supposed to do that, especially not supposed to do that before we even started playing. But what it allowed us to do is, obviously we created a huge foothold within the music scene that we've been able to continue to engage with because we are the guys that work with the Black Pumas. But we also were able to convince Austin that we're here to be a catalyst for what makes this city unique and be a flag bearer for this city. And I think in doing those things in different ways, we've now worked in the skateboarding community with a local shop called No Comply. And we've got a bunch of other stuff in the hopper that's kind of the same sort of, how do we be ultra-referential in a way that translates throughout Austin, and it's seen some traction for sure.
For me, sometimes it's also about to be recognized and be listened. For the celebration of the Scudetto, we have more than 250 spontaneous watch party around the globe. And they start sending all the videos, the images, you know, and the fact that we repost them, we create a special, you know, storytelling about that, make them very proud of it. And sometimes they just want to comment about the content you're producing, they are going to give advice, they want to see that the club really cares about, you know, discussing with them, giving them visibility. Sometimes if someone is traveling from US to Milan to watch the match, he makes the picture with his scarf and he wants to be in the official account. So all these elements allow us to nurture the community around the world.
Yeah, and from my side, there's a couple of things. So some great examples from the AC Milan side. I've been a massive fan off the back of Milan winning the Serie A, and some of the backstage footage that have come out from the Zlatan speech to the celebrations, giving the fans a backstage pass and making them understand the humans that help the club become the great club that it is, all does a massive thing when it comes to bringing people together. Again, all or nothing, Arsenal fan, that brought the fans a lot closer to the club because they understood the kit man, the photographer, the people that go behind it. That makes you feel special, and that makes you feel like you know the club inside out. But also, going back to the example you mentioned about listening, right? Personalization is so powerful, but it comes with being a very, very good listener. And if you have teams that prioritize listening and seeing what fans are talking about, and you're able to jump into that conversation at the right time with the right message, and be there when they don't expect you to be, that's a great way for you to be able to make the club, even though big, feel very, very small. Because still take the time to listen to somebody that no one believes that is significant.
Yeah, building community is vital, but going back to resources, return on investment, return on capital are important considerations. And views and likes and award-winning content, we all love it, but ownership always asks, do we make more money by doing this? So, $1,000,000 question. Million used to mean a lot of money way back in the day, but I guess inflation. $1,000,000,000 question. How do these types of marketing and branding campaigns actually drive revenue?
So it's funny because when I joined CONCACAF, one of the first things I said was, "Where's my budget?" And so they gave me my broadcast team's budget. So I go through it. I'm like, "Well, this pays for cameras and this." I'm like, "So there's nothing there." Then they're like, "No, but the partnerships budget." So I'm looking at it. I'm like, "This it pays for LEDs, the flag bearers." Nothing there. I went to digital, same thing, right? Oh, this pays for the clipping service tool, this and that. I'm like, and they're like, "No, it's all of yours." I'm like, "No, it isn't." So after I had to present a very eloquent, beautiful presentation, but I got my own investment budget. But the next meeting was like, "Can you attach revenue number to each one of these investments?" And I'm like, "Well, if we look at the dictionary of investment, it means you're investing for future return." So we had to go through a little bit of that dance, right? Not easy. And they keep asking me, because the hardest part in marketing is people want a direct one-to-one correlation, but that's impossible, right? I think what I always try to do when I present these numbers is look at it as an aggregate ROI of like, here's the investment that we're trying to do to try to chase this much more money. Right? And so far it's working, but we're going through budgets right now, so maybe I'll get a call next week that my strategy is not working. But that's the key part of this, because if you get into this 101, it's not an investment anymore, right? And this is where a lot of times football can be its own enemy, that to focus on the short term versus the long term. And I always try to equate it to business, right? When a product launches, very rare is it a massive hit day one, right? So that's what I always try to figure out to convince my leadership to think about it that way, and then show other metrics that show sentiment, our audience, and all of these things are adding up, and they're all part of a 360 plan to achieve an end goal.
Yeah, I agree with Heidi. I was nodding my head like a crazy person. But essentially, it's about not looking at marketing and community strategies as an integrated thing, but more as a collaborative thing. You have to look at the macro of what you're trying to achieve. All teams are part of one team, and ultimately the audience will decide what works best. You just have to know what dials to switch on at what time. I like to see it as more of a conversion funnel, right? If you want to appeal to the macros, even those that are not just fans of your club, get them to love the club, first and foremost, or where you stand for, how you play football. That's the macro, that's the content. Once you get people that engage, then you interact with those guys in a different way. And then once you get people that are really engaged, then you're like, all right, cool, they're ready to convert, or they're ready to embark on an experience. It's the most efficient way to be able to generate an ROI, because you're not focusing on converting people that are not engaged, right? So engage the people that are ready to be converted.
Yeah, and if I can add one point of clarity with that, it's also being humble enough to measure your own self and your plans, right? I remember my first event, obviously being a woman and trying to move women's sports, I was like, we're gonna go all out. And I convinced the leadership to give me enough money to build a significant activation. And that's how we briefed the agencies. I said, I wanna see an activation that you only see in a men's World Cup. And they embraced it. And then when we activated, I saw the analysis afterwards and broke down all of the activities, which ones resonated the most, and it wasn't the most expensive. So I was able to say, you know what, team? We have to be humble. We can't pretend, right, and tell the leadership, don't worry, look, it worked, right? We were able to say, leadership, This is what worked, this is what didn't work, and this is what we're learning from to adapt later. So you have to have the ability to say, I'm taking risks, but I'm going to be honest with myself and accept what hasn't worked.
So one final question for all of you. How will sports organizations continue to differentiate themselves over the next 3 to 5 years? James, start with you.
Yeah, I think from our perspective, or looking at the Austin FC experience, you know, being able to see a club started from scratch and then being able to kind of really see that engagement from the community, it's been a good reminder for me as a marketing professional in the sport that we've got to stay sustained in the basics of what are we actually positioning for people. Are we positioning for the 22 guys that are kicking a ball around on the field, or are we actually selling something completely different? Are we selling this idea of community, this idea that you now have a language because you root for Arsenal or you root for Austin FC? And, you know, technology, the movement in the industry, all of it's really, really exciting and really great, but we've got to be careful that it doesn't take us away from that core value proposition of why people sign up to come into the stadium, why they buy the jerseys, why they follow us on social. It's for that. And so in a lot of ways, I think when you look at the next couple of years, the advancements, the things that are going to prove successful are going to be those tools that better help us deliver on that core piece, rather than some of the bells and whistles things that tend to come along and then, you know, tend to fade away. So that's kind of the prism that we use to kind of look at, if it's tech, if it's innovation, what do we want it to help us do? And it's ultimately trying to better that community value proposition.
For me, being entertainment brands, it's very important that the football clubs and the sport entities will follow in enlarge somehow the fan base, with more cross-fertilization with music, with entertainment, with fashion, because there's already a great example. Paris Saint-Germain probably is the best one in the world on this, but there is a huge opportunity to be much more relevant after the pitch, beyond the pitch. This one for sure. The second I see is just the e-gaming, e-sports and gaming industry. It's going to be massive in the future. It's already very big, with more than 1 billion for audience in 2025. So it's an area where naturally sport entity have to enter and generate value there as well.
I'm going to build on Lamberto and maybe go a little off script from the question for a second, but I think the biggest thing that I noticed, and I don't know if you all encounter the same thing, was that I wanted to establish from the get-go that football and commercial or marketing are not at odds, right? Because you could tell, especially because I didn't come from a traditional football background, when I would walk into meetings, they'll be like, oh God, what is she gonna bring to the table, right? Football is seen as this sacred thing, right? And I wanted to make sure that we really open people's eyes to say, we're not in conflict, it's additive, right, to the experience. And also additive because the more revenue we're able to generate, where does that all go as a confederation? It goes back into football. So that was the first thing. So I say that because without that change in mindset, it proves really difficult to innovate, right? People just want you to stay in this box and magically figure out how to make money, right? And I kind of felt like, a parent, like, you think money grows on trees? Like, so that was the first thing. The second thing is a little bit similar to what Lamberto said. We can benefit a lot in football by learning from others, right? I tell the whole team, instead of feeling like you have to stare at this blank wall and innovate, learn from others. Let's look at the NFL. Let's look at the NBA. Let's look at Milan. Let's look at Austin. But let's look at Disney and Pixar.
Yeah.
Let's look at the last album launch. I am sure there's something we can learn and adapt into our world and use that to innovate.
Yeah, 100%, I agree with that. It's all about being open-minded to not just technological development, but also cultural developments. I feel that at the moment, football is in a very interesting place, especially when it comes with the new, younger audience. Right now, the players hold more real estate or are the biggest generator of fandom amongst the youth than the clubs are. It used to be completely the other way around when I was younger. Now, what clubs have to do is go away from relying on the players to be the ones that are driving it to be culturally relevant and start saying, who are we in this story and what's our personality and what do we stand for? And how do we get that outside using cultural collaborations and new technology? So people start to know us for who we are, so that whether the players come or go, that they still stay for the club. And I feel like that's how the football clubs are going to be able to stand tall in the next 3 to 5 years going forward.
Elfried, Heidi, Lamberto, James, thanks for a fascinating discussion. We promised to keep you awake post-lunch hour. Really enjoyed it. David, back over to you.
Can I have my microphone back? Thank you very much. Mission accomplished. No, thank you very much. I think there is so much fascination in this area because, well, like you guys know, Elfried, you'll know, it's a really complicated one. People just don't understand it. They need to, we heard in a previous panel, listen to that audience. We can't tell them what we want. We've got to let them tell us, but, you know, and making it, you know, as a diverse and engaging experience as possible. I think you guys have elicited that across the course of this last 40 minutes or so. So thank you very much indeed. This is going to continue to be a hot topic. I'm absolutely sure of that. Thank you very much indeed. And thank you to Chad as well for chairing the discussion. Big round of applause for the panel. Thank you very much indeed. Off you go, guys.